What's up, guys? Welcome back. And today I'm joined by Maya. She has a YouTube channel called Magic Maya where she talks about self development for men, but also just relationship dynamics. And she has a lot of good content when it comes to those topics. And thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you so much for having me. And again, I'm so grateful to have this open space with another content creator and also just to talk about these uncomfortable, maybe more so controversial topics, but that are also very important for, I think, our healing as a collective in today's society.
Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, when it comes to growth, sometimes you need to have those like uncomfortable conversations. And it goes for like yeah, on the micro level, also on the macro level. I mean, when it comes to any sort of interpersonal relationship, whether it be romantic, friendship, I notice, when you don't have those uncomfortable conversations, when something arises, it almost just builds up and it'll end with something way more uncomfortable than if you address it head on. So that's why I think it's really important, that being able and willing to cover these topics in a way that is taking like a solution oriented approach, much like you do on your channel.
Yeah, thank you for saying that. And I think you really touched on that perfectly is, within the uncomfortability and being able to be in uncomfortability, that's truly setting you up to be a part of life because life, you can't get away from uncomfortability. It's a part of it. And I think your ability to adapt in those situations to serve you and perhaps the other people around you is a way to look at yourself in a new lens, a lens that maybe hasn't been able to be looked at just by yourself. And that's why relationships and having other people around you is such a crucial part of healing, is because the external world is just a representation of what's within. And we can actually target specific aspects of ourselves that we can't see just, sitting in a meditation for forever. That's why
Yeah,
it's so important, conflict.
absolutely. That's something that I've discussed kind of recently on my channel, is like, you don't, as human beings, we don't exist in a vacuum. And pretty much all of our, there's this book that I actually have, that I've created a video on. I haven't posted it yet, but called The Courage to Be Disliked. And it talks about how almost every problem, it is a result of interpersonal relationship problems. Even if you place your own judgments on yourself, you're doing that oftentimes. As children, we grow up and we place judgments on ourselves based on our comparisons towards of others, right? So it's very important. And so one thing that you've discussed, are you familiar with like the scale of consciousness, like David Hawkins' scale of consciousness?
I am a
Oh,
little I am a little bit. I wouldn't say I'm
super, yeah,
super caught up with it, but I have heard about it.
right. So it's interesting because they, like, in his scale of consciousness, like, it goes up from disempowered into self-empowered into states of, higher states of consciousness, which include, peace, enlightenment, whatever you want to call it. But the lowest scales are kind of the victim mentality, which is like to point the finger at others, kind of just look outside, project all your issues onto other people. And it's also interesting because there's another psychologist who has this thing called the drama triangle, which includes, being a victim. There's 3 points of the triangle, right? There's a victim, the persecutor, and then the savior. But it's like whenever you engage with one of these kind of characters, or you kind of play into this, and it's almost, now, in order to be a victim, you have to have a persecutor or an abuser.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you'd care to like kind of touch on that in regard to the way that you see things playing out currently.
Totally. I think that that's something that I think human beings can all relate to. I think we can all relate to there's been a moment in our life where we felt like a victim. And that's something that I think more people need to understand, is the very things that we feel ashamed of or we feel like no one else can relate to. most of the times that's actually where we as human beings get to connect. And it's not to say like we should be over identified to the roles of the victim or etc., because we've all been those three things in other
Mhm.
people's reality as well. Maybe we've been like that whole triangle in a, like, in other people's lives, our families, our relationships, etc. And I think the key thing to take away within, I guess, my personal experience of being a victim is I truly have this concept that I try my best to live out, and it's to take total accountability for your life. Because when you take accountability, there's no room to be a victim. There's no room for anything else but to be self-empowered and have true freedom. And that first starts with accepting everything as a part of you and knowing that it's there not to make you disempowered. Or maybe it is for a short period of time, but to be fully empowered, you need to know what it's like to be disempowered. So there's always like those gold nuggets we can take away out of like our suffering, our pain, our victimhood even, and turn it into something that we can even help other people with, and that's really the concept of why I even started my channel, is because I was sick and tired of playing small. I was sick and tired of being less kind of then in my own personal narrative. Like I would always play as a small character and put everyone else as more important than me. And when I switched that script and I was like, I need to do this for me. I need to take control. I need to take accountability for the first time in my life and do the things that I want to do, not for another person's validation, but because it excites me and it makes me feel alive in a lot of the ways. And when you're a victim, there's a part of you that only feels alive in that victim role because it ignites so much trauma triggers and it makes you feel alive. But
Mhm.
that's not your true aligned sense of alignment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what's going on too in a scientific level, if you want to think about it like that, is you're like reactivating these neural pathways
Mm-hmm.
that had been created by some initial traumatic experience. And guess what? As human beings, we don't seek out the best things for ourselves. We seek out what's comfortable, what's familiar. We
Yeah.
want it because we lean into like wanting homeostasis. So if we grew up in an environment that was toxic or that was, dysfunctional, we tend to seek that out. We gravitate towards that again. And we embrace this victim thinking. And a part of it too is that it's getting perpetuated, I feel like, in mainstream culture, that almost like there's a lot of these social movements that are almost encouraging this, saying, hey, look, you've been uh, done wrong in
Mm-hmm.
some form of fashion, and it's all of these people's fault. And you deserve to basically like wallow in that victim thinking. But the irony of it is that as soon as you embrace that, as soon as you start placing all the blame outside of yourself and you take away all responsibility, you have now like handed away all of your power like voluntarily to
Mm-hmm.
everyone else besides yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting, is that I think people aren't really understanding that that's what they're doing when they lean into this type of mentality. um
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah. There was something else that I was going to bring up. So, I mean, that also goes into the idea of like the trauma bond, which is essentially, and they've done studies on this too. There's a woman named Lisa Feldman who talks about how our emotions, most of the time, are actually a result of something from our past. There's some situation that's current that might be triggering it, but the level and the extent of the emotions that we express is oftentimes much more related to something in our past than something actually that's what's happening right now. And that's actually true. That goes along. I don't know if you're familiar with Eckhart Tolle and the power
I
of.
am. Yeah, I am.
So yeah, so he talks about the pain body, right? And so that's what's happening when people are having these big emotional, expressing all these emotions. In it's really activating that pain body. And all of this, can just this conscious awareness of what's really going on, I think is really valuable for people so that they understand what's going um, on a more fundamental level.
I truly, yeah, I'm really grateful that you're bringing this up because it's really important. Being a human being isn't an easy thing. And I think that's something when, when I was kind of getting started within spirituality, it was like this false sense of relief that I found by band-aiding everything with a spiritual label of like, oh, like, you know, I could just be thinking about like things that make me happy when I'm in like the pit of hell in my brain. And it's like, and like just like doing life that way. And I found so much more suffering within that by
Yeah.
also ignoring the very parts of yourself that just need to be seen by you again. And that's like the true beauty of it. And that's the true beauty you can give another person as well within their own, you know, emotional tendencies. And not to say that you should take on abuse in any way, but sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do for yourself and for another person is just to see that emotion and not labeling it as wrong. It's just seeing it and embracing it. And the amount of healing that can take place within a person is profound when we stop trying to like label it as anything other than right. Because if it's in your experience right now, it's there to serve you in some way. It's just how are you going to allow it to serve you?
Yeah. I think yeah, I think when it comes to that, like what that makes me think of is like if you are experiencing this kind of pain body experience, it's pointing you in a direction of something that did happen in your past that you haven't healed yet. If you have this really big emotional reaction to something, and your impulse is to naturally like blame it on somebody, blame it on some external thing, some external circumstance, I think it's really inviting you to take a look at why and get to the root of why it's causing that in the first place. And yeah, I mean, here's another thing that kind of goes along with this as well, is like what can be referred to. I've heard psychologists refer to this as like black and white thinking, where something's either all good or it's all bad. And I think another thing that what you're kind of leaning into a bit is, look, things exist in shades of gray. Being a human being, like you said earlier, is not an easy task, and it's not all drawing within or coloring within the lines. It's everything is shades of gray. There's no such thing as like a totally good or angelic person, and the flip side might be true as well. So being able to understand that in these our emotions also are just fleeting, they're transitory, so it's important to take a step back and be able to kind of observe them and see what's going on. It talks about, in stoicism they talk about that a lot as well. And I think in being able to embrace that rational mind, taking a deep breath and kind of seeing the situation and seeking that self-awareness is really powerful.
Totally. I agree. And I think the one pitfall I find myself still falling into, like, you know, I do talk about all of these things, but I'm also, just as you are, we're human beings. Like, I think these topics are so important to address, but it's also giving each other and whoever's listening that this is a part of being a human being, you know, is having these conversations, but still maybe falling into the pits. But like when you can bring your awareness back onto the reasons of like, why did I find myself over identified to an emotion that did not serve me or perhaps the other person I was in conflict with? Or like, you know, just maybe myself. Why am I identifying to this emotion that makes me feel like shit most of the time? And sometimes people get in a habit of doing that. Is like igniting it like maybe every day or like, you know, and it kind of shapes them into having this identity that this is what makes me who I am. I am reactive, and that is why I drink alcohol. I am this, you know, I have low self-worth. That is why I'm anxious and I stay inside all day. There needs to be a level of awareness about that, but not to be identified to the emotion, because that can create a self-concept that is blocking you from actually experiencing, like I said, that word alignment to who you truly are.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This brings me to a point that I saw. There's this Dr. Frank, his name is Frank Yeomans, and he discusses kind of like this black and white thinking that we're talking about. He says that if people can evolve and accept that everyone in the world is imperfect, it's a mixed bag, and that there's shades of gray, people will evolve. And he says, like, he gives this example, and I'm just going to read it real quick because I think that it kind of sheds light on how we can do this. It's like, he talks about, for example, the church priests can be very immoral. And he says, people will either say, oh, these are just terrible bad eggs. They don't have anything to do with the church. And I totally have 100% belief in the church. And then others say, well, no, this is proof that the church is totally corrupt. And, I'm leaving the church, never coming back. And either one is an extreme. A better example would be to see the church as an earthly institution. It's flawed. They need to do a better job policing themselves, but not to deny what's wrong and pretend it's perfect, and not throw the whole thing out and pretend it's all bad. This is more mature thinking rather than primitive thinking. And he says black and white thinking always leads to conflict. So, it's interesting because with social media, with the rise of social media, I feel like this black and white thinking it's almost just like gasoline's been put on the fire, and everyone's aligning with this particular group or that particular group. And what that's caused is this division, and is more of this victim mentality to say, hey, look, I'm the victim because it's all their fault. And as soon as you start putting the blame and pointing the finger at this other group, now you voluntarily take on that victim position by doing that. So it's a tricky situation that we're in right now.
It is, especially I think with social media, it heightens a lot of areas that, have our attention in like media outlets, like the things that we see every day, or like the communities, the groups, the women's rights, the men's rights, I don't know if you've seen like that like soft guy era now is like a result of like just women kind of honestly abusing their femininity in a way that's manipulative, and it's turned men into kind of fighting back. And that's truly what all these communities are. It's like a fighting back of like the other person's actions. And that's why my intention with my channel is not to like, create some sort of like community where we bash women, or like what I like to do is I like to just talk about what's current right now, and not to get us stuck in it, but to get us more aware and expansive of other ways of thinking, and actually incorporating a higher purpose into the reasons why we do things. The reasons why I talk to men in such a way that gives them empowerment is because I see very clear in my mind how that's what men are needing more than ever, just due to the lack of femininity this planet has. And this planet's not set up for femininity. It's not. We live in a masculine world right now. And that's why I think it's really important to talk to men in a way that gives them a perspective of like the woman's perspective that I try to bring into the conversation, to actually expand it into new ways of thinking and living, and understanding what the other person wants, needs, desires, rather than knowing what we don't like and then just over identifying to it. It doesn't make any sort of solution happen.
Yeah, exactly. And if we're going to continue to exist on this planet together, we have to adopt this collaborative approach instead of this competition. I mean, it's not a competition. It's not to say who's better than, okay, you're better than me or I'm better than you. It's how can we continue to coexist in a way where we both win, where we both exist in a way that's harmonious and productive and happy and healthy. And so I really appreciate that you're bringing that to the table, because especially there's not a lot of women, but especially younger women that are talking about this, and it makes your channel and you as a person very unique in that way. You're able to see kind of what's going on, and I love how you're able to kind of have that objective approach with things rather than leaning into any specific narrative. I don't see you over identify with any particular narrative, and it's important to do that as well, because it's very easy when you run into issues, then you say, oh, okay, I'm going to join this group, or like I'm going to be red pill, or I'm going to be like black like pill, whatever the hell.
Yeah.
And so it's like it's really important to use your own mind, use your discernment and your judgment, and come up with your own ideas, which I see you doing all the time. So I really appreciate that. Another thing I was going to mention here is that you've heard of the shadow, right? In Jungian psychology. I think a lot of this outward aggression that we see, which is again the flip side of that victim mentality, by being a victim, you're almost naturally now justified at taking out aggressive behavior, malicious behavior towards others, because you say, "Oh, I'm a victim. I've been oppressed, or I've been whatever. Like, for example, people, so there, another example that the psychologist gave is like, you know, ISIS or terrorist organizations, they will say that they're doing these things in the name of God or in the name of their holy code because, you know, the world has done whatever to them there, but now they justify these terrible acts. And so that's another harmful paradigm of adopting this victim thinking. You also see it in cancel culture.
Yeah.
When people go and like viciously attack somebody because they think, and they kind of just jump on this bandwagon thinking. And it's another con that we're experiencing of social media where it's so easy to just jump onto these narratives. And another thing that he brought up is this paranoid schizoid position, which is the victim. Again, it goes in hand with the victim thinking, which is that there's going to be something that's perfect. And that goes into identifying with this, like saying, okay, in those examples, the perfection is this religious perspective that they have, but it leaves people open to being taken advantage of by narcissistic people, antisocial leaders who promise the world and can't deliver on it. And it's a very slippery slope because again, it leads to, it's part and parcel with that victim thinking and with that black and white thinking, because it's saying, okay, this is all good and this is all bad. So when it comes to that, for example, you have this video that's, what did you call it? You said it's the scam of feminism,
Yeah.
and there's no such thing as toxic masculinity. Would you care to kind of elaborate that on that a bit?
Yeah, I think that, you know, as a result of feminism, there is going to be implications upon that in our modern day society because, you know, as we are right now, women in general have a lot of rights now. So, you know, like we have the rights that we were fighting for in the past. They're given to us. Women can be empowered in a lot of ways in our society today. And you know, not necessarily thrive because I don't think women can thrive when they're not embracing femininity into their lives. A lot of women are more so programmed to be masculine. And I think in that video I addressed it. I think more women in today's culture who are over identified to masculinity are the toxic masculinity in today's society that are now perceiving our men as toxic. And that's not to say, and that's why I don't like using the word, like, when we say toxic masculinity, it's assumed that it's just men. But I have a different idea of that. I think it's more so who the women in, for example, it's like they could be the toxic masculinity within their own lives, being more so empowered within their masculinity to even attract that sort of man to just replicate that very idea or that ideal system into your mind to see it portrayed outside of you. So everything that like you put your time and energy towards, feminism, for example, is basically the bashing of our men today, are men that had nothing to do with the past. The men of today's culture, you can't blame them for the past. They weren't there. This is a new type of men we're talking to right now. Be mad at their ancestors all you want. That's okay. Waste your time with that. But I don't have any room in my life to even fuel that feminist movement now. It's really something that I'm very passionate about because all that time bashing men could be taken to lift them up. So then you can actually get what you want, is to be in femininity, to have men to be able to carry you within that and respect you in that. So that's kind of like my whole thing within toxic masculinity in today's society. Yeah, it's a funny one, honestly, when you really look into it.
Yeah. I like that perspective because I mean, ultimately, these are energies that we're playing with. There's masculine energy, there's feminine energy, and those go throughout the universe. And you know, we all have both, and both exist everywhere. Um, but I like that you made the point because, you know, if you are somebody that's overtaken with that kind of tyrant type energy, it doesn't matter what gender or what sex you identify with. It's really what energy you're taking on, and again, what you focus on grows. So if you're thinking about that all the time, if you're harboring, and what you resist persists too. So if you're harboring all this hate towards what you perceive to be toxic masculinity, that was really profound what you said, because maybe then you're attracting men to you for you to kind of
To
attack
see
in
that.
a way, or for to be
Yeah.
that. And it's really, really interesting, like a really profound insight to notice that, because I noticed that that's what happens to people. It's when you watch where they're when you see, that's another thing I think in Stoicism or Greek philosophy, but it's like, know them by their fruits. And it's like the actions speak louder than words. Watch their actions, not their words. And a lot of times you'll see people attract these situations, relationships. It could be work environments. It could be situations in their life that are clearly not serving them. And, oftentimes the opposite of what they verbally proclaim it is that they want in their life. But that right there should show you the thoughts that they're entertaining. Because they're focused on that, and you're bringing more of that into your life. When you focus on thoughts of harmony, of peace, and you want that in your life, you want that in your relationships, you're naturally gonna have that more collaborative approach. That's not trying to point the finger at somebody else, trying to cast blame and attack somebody else because you don't feel a certain way. And, ultimately, as human beings, especially as grown adults, we have to take responsibility for our own emotions. We can't just be constantly projecting them onto other people, because what we're doing, we might think in the moment that makes us feel good. It makes us feel justified. It makes us feel righteous. It makes us feel validated for whatever, but ultimately what that's doing is it's creating a pattern for yourself where you are not at the cause in your reality. You are simply embracing that reactivity and leaning into that victim mentality. You're just going to attract more things to complain about by doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And for me, there's a level of disturbance to it, is like a lot of the feminist movement, and the women that I've seen online, it's like they're trying to fight this fight that men aren't even wanting to be in. So it's like men don't even want to be fighting with women in the ways that women think that they do. And I think can cause a lot of destruction in women's lives, of course, men's lives, but let's talk about the children. There's like, what about the feminists who are moms, but they have sons, and they can talk to their son in this way, but everything outside of her son, every man that comes into her life, she points out the problems. And that has an impact on our children as well. Like, our children are sponges, and they can absorb a lot of what we kind of speak into existence. And that's why I think it's also really important to talk about these subjects, to have healthy, balanced households that
Yeah.
are very rare in today's society, is to have an actually healthy household to raise the next generation of children where true change can actually be seen.
I couldn't agree more. It's really great you brought that up too, because that's absolutely true. It's like less and less healthy households and
Yeah.
homes, which is then creating less and less healthy people.
Yeah.
It's become to the point where all this dysfunctional family dynamics have become the norm.
Yeah.
And TV, the media, has not helped in this regard. I mean, they've made it so that we think this is normal when it's not. But really, it comes down to that, and it comes down to, yeah, if you're going out there and constantly having all these unhealthy opinions of the opposite sex, whether you're a man or a woman, and then you're raising, girls and boys in that environment, you're basically putting shame into them. You're raising them to live with some level of shame, whether you realize it or not, and you're creating more dysfunction. I mean, we see it now that more and more people are having more and more of these narcissistic traits in our society. It's becoming more and more normal, and things that are kind of outrageous to say, that would have been outrageous to say even like 30, 40 years ago, are now kind of accepted. And it's kind of like this frog in the water phenomenon, where it's like slowly getting turned up the temperature, and it's like we don't even notice that it's happening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
that's a true purpose of mine, and it is the underlying intention to my videos too, is I understand that, we can become the change that we wish to see in our own life, but it really is up to us to heal our very parts that have been disowned by us or maybe other people, and to just be aware of them, and to know that, to see actual change it's going to be in the next generation's hands. So the more healing that we can do as a collective society, as adults, the more that we will give the next generation a chance to actually embrace their spiritual essence that has been diminished, as human beings. Like, it's crazy, but for me, sometimes, just to put it into perspective, it's like we're on a planet right now. We can all relate to like this human experience in some way. And why don't we focus on the very things that we can relate to? That's why I don't, it's not off bounds for me to talk about uncomfortability, because I truly believe that's where like the gold lies, is like within our pain, within our suffering, not to keep us in the dark, but to actually be like, I don't know, this phrase is tossed around a lot in the spiritual community. Is like being a light worker. And being a light worker, you need to be able to embrace your darkness to be the light in other people's lives. So the light workers who are just on the, kind of the outbound of like just being in the light, just embracing light, you're not doing anything for the people that need a person to be able just to adapt in their darkness and show them the light.
Yeah. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I think I've heard that being referred to as spiritual bypassing too, where you kind of just want to sit in all these happy thoughts all the time and not kind of acknowledge the more true, like, real issues that actually occur. And I think that's definitely valid. The Going back to the family kind of dynamic here, I think with social media, that's another issue that I see, is allowing all of these outside influences to govern. Because you got to understand, at a certain level, we're walking around, we're having all these thoughts during the day. We can't stop. The mind just thinks, right? But most of our thoughts are not our own. We're absorbing thoughts from, it could be our parents, it could be our peers, people. But now with social media, it's like we're absorbing all this information all the time, and we're out here thinking that these thoughts are ours, but the majority of them are not. And we again, the more we identify with these different groups of people, the less that our thinking truly is ours. Now we've identified with this entire ideology, and maybe there's certain grains of truth that are good from that ideology. I'm not saying to throw it all out. That's why you need to have this discernment and think in shades of gray instead of black and white. You still keep going to that black and white thinking. You think, okay, well, now I'm identifying as this, whether it be political party or, it could be feminism, it could be red pill, it could be whatever, right? And you're just taking all this stuff on, which isn't, you haven't actually put it through your critical thinking lens.
Right. Yes. I think that's something that's flawed in today's society, is like having even a sense of individuality. It's like having individuality is something that's not really celebrated at all, because the more individual you are as a person, the more what's the word, like, you can't be easily persuaded into thinking as like the mind of, like, the collective's kind of program mindset, which happens through social media and the programming that is taking place. That's, most people are being programmed when they wake up and when they go to bed. And most of the times people wake up and they go on Instagram and scroll. They go to bed, before they go to bed, they go on Instagram and scroll, or TikTok. And then your subconscious mind is like picking up also and is being programmed with other people's perceptions.
Well, what's interesting about that you mentioned is that I actually think that you're absolutely right. But I think that what's happened is that people are actually, they're doing that. They're embracing this hive mind type thinking.
Yes.
Under the guise of individuality. Somehow we've gotten, because all these liberation movements and all these things have been kind of thrust upon us. You mentioned in your channel that the OnlyFans thing, or all this stuff, and you think that you're actually stepping into your individuality or stepping into your own empowerment, but really what you're doing is you bought into this narrative, and you bought into this.
You're so right. That is so true. That is so true, because that's exactly what people are doing. Because like there is like that sense of individuality that's like a mask almost that you put on, of like, oh yeah, like I'm a woman, I'm empowered, I'm gonna be my own individual woman and go on OnlyFans and basically sell my soul for a coin. And it's like, wait a second, that's not individual. That's being programmed into the woman's mindset at a very young age.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's frightening.
yeah, and that's why this stuff is so insidious. That's why you have to really get a grasp on your own ideas and your own, your own thoughts. You have to really take control over your own mind because there's this book Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
No.
he has a good analogy in there. I mean, the whole book is written from the perspective as if he's interviewing the devil,
Hmm.
but it's very interesting because the conversations in the book, he talks about how most people in life are drifters, and they basically are victims to what he calls hypnotic rhythm, which means that they get stuck in these patterns of thinking. They get stuck in these patterns of thought that are, again, enforced on them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like the movie The Matrix, right? You're all basically, we become like these Agent Smiths that are taking on the programming of the Matrix, or taking on this programming that is being pushed out, thinking that we have our own thinking that we're acting in our own free will, but we're really not. And it's really, like I said, it's very insidious because it's like it's being done through this false guise of individuality, through this false guise of sexual liberation, this false promise of progression. And it's actually devolving us spiritually and morally and in every sense of the word, mentally, emotionally. Um, and yeah, when it comes to relationships themselves, you had a line in your video. You talked about we sit back, allowing destruction to take place in relationships, allowing anything from the outside into the relationship, and then pointing the blame at our partner without realizing we're on the same team.
Mm-hmm.
And I love that. And another analogy for that is like you and your partner, and this is true of our parents and our grandparents, I think, to a large extent. They were like their own ship. They were their own container. Issues would arise in the partnership or the relationship, and they would fix them between themselves. You'd have a healthy conversation between each other and come to an agreement. Whereas now it's like we have all these holes in the ship. We're allowing anything into the ship, and the water's coming in, and the ship is sinking.
Yeah. Oh, totally. And like that's something like, it's practice. Like being in a relationship is something that's like I'm sure been in a relationship. I'm currently in a relationship and there's still moments where I'm like I feel like everything I talk about, everything I preach, it's like it's just wiped. Like when a trigger comes online sometimes, and this is why it's like I love talking about this stuff because it also puts into perspective the aspects of who I am. I still have parts of myself that like when I'm in conflict, I don't want to be in conflict in those moments, and it's a practice to learn how to show up in the highest way for yourself and for your partner. It's a kind of like a give and a take. And I do think though, like the most profound lessons I've learned and the most profound ways I've been able to see myself is through a partnership, is through with one person. I think a lot of today's society, it's like, oh, something's not going right in the relationship. I'm going to go on Instagram and DM someone, or I'm going to go have an occasional drink with the girls and maybe flirt with a couple guys at a bar. What's the harm in that? But there's
Yeah,
so much harm in that because you're
and
avoiding your partner.
right, and talk shit about my partner behind their back while I'm
Yeah.
going and doing this.
Yeah.
And you've ruined the sanctity of the relationship by doing that. You're seeking outside support. Like there's also science that backs this up too. But if you go around your single friends, and especially if you're complaining about your relationship, you're way more statistically likely to end up in a breakup or a divorce. It's just like that is enabling trashing your relationship. You're trashing, you're walking all over the relationship and regarding it like trash by doing that. So yeah, you had another quote in here that was like, uh every trigger that gets confronted is to get healed, and trust is having your partner's best interest at heart. And I really agree with that too. But by doing that, by engaging that behavior, it is complete breach of that trust.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that happens because people as individuals, we don't have our best interest in mind. In those moments that like we can't take on maybe another person's let's say like perception of reality being experienced like through you, which usually happens through like conflict. Conflict happens when you have two opposing things. And being too identified with the opposing thing separates you too. It identifies you to the very thing you are wanting to resolve. So I think having your highest interest in mind and practicing that daily is something that will allow you the ability to take into consideration another person's emotions as well as your own. And sometimes people drown in their own emotional state. So to have another person in that is like life or death, it feels like. And
Yeah.
that's why people, I think, run really quickly because it feels like a death. And I think maybe that's exactly what needs to happen. Relationships go through periods of life and death cycles. And like that's to grow you two together. And a lot of the times people grow apart, it's because they are actually growing apart. They're not growing in unity that will actually fulfill the relationship in a grand way. So it's like being very open to also learning effective ways to communicate. And that's something I am still working on. Like, like I love talking about this stuff because I love being really real with people. Like, me and you, we can talk about all of this thought-provoking things and self-development, but I will be the first one to admit where I fall short in that. And
Yeah.
I do my best. Like that's like the thing within your emotional states, just do your very best to take accountability for them and also to learn how to navigate your relationships through maybe the disturbances that come up and taking out of like, okay, what could I have done better in this situation and how can I put that into like something else, like the next conflict, because conflict's a part of relationships as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And, I'd be curious if you have any, I think that it does take that. It takes that self-reflection. Do you have any like kind of strategies or things that you actually use to do that or ways of thinking about that?
For me, it's something that like I feel like we can all experience. It's like sometimes on our emotional, like our pain body, for example, sometimes it's like a knee jerk reaction and it's like we kind of have to surrender into the very emotional state sometimes to fully get out of them. And for me, it's being able to accept myself as an imperfect human. Because I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of the times we'll beat ourselves up after a conflict or after a disagreement and make it seem like, like we're not perfect. Like, and I think my very thing that I just try to embrace within my life is that I'm not a perfect person. I'm perfect. Like, I think we're all perfect in some degree. We're all from the creator, but this life experience isn't set up to be perfect. And I think just try to take out of it a lesson in any conflict, any disagreement. What's the lesson and how can it serve you?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Like I said before, in today's world, everybody's like so self-absorbed, and so I think like a lot of the times people will think that cultivating these virtuous qualities or cultivating any sort of virtue is like weak or something.
Mhm.
But I actually completely disagree with that because if you take a look at it, your humility in this example, right, saying you don't have all the answers, right, that's actually what's going to allow you to develop yourself into a stronger person and a better version of yourself. That lack of humility that people have, where they just want to, again, point the finger at everybody else, put the blame on everyone else. Well, you're not going to grow as a person. You're going to stay stuck at where you're at your level, at your current level. You're going to have a fixed mindset instead of a growth mindset. And so even if you want to look at it from that self-absorbed kind of vain perception of like, oh yeah, I'm so cool. Well, you're really not unless you if you want to be cool, if you want to be dope and be like the best version of yourself you can be, then you're going to want to learn. You're not going to want to just keep walking through life with your blinders on and not learning anything from your mistakes. So I think it's super important that you had another quote in here that was if you've been hurt, use that as inspiration to heal yourself, not continue the cycle of hurt. And yeah, again, I think it's going to serve you in the long run by doing that because nobody's going to want to be around somebody that constantly is playing the victim card and basically, verbally, mentally abusing people that come into contact with them. I've met people that do that. It doesn't end well for them. So,
And I think like that last quote that I sometimes think you say things and I'm like, oh, I said that. Sometimes in my videos, it's like I just free talk, but it's very powerful because for me, within like the parts of myself that invoke such pain, and sometimes that was brought on by others for my evolution, you know, because we evolve through the very things that disturb us on some spiritual level, because that allows us more inspiration to make maybe another conscious action that will better our lives. For me, this whole YouTube space, me opening myself to myself actually and being comfortable in my authenticity, happened by a breaking point in my life. It happened last summer when I was going through a breakup. If it wasn't for that breakup, I would still be probably that same version, like victim, over sexualized, needing outside validation. But because I got to a point where I actually was like forced to like question my life in such a magnitude and being like, when you have to get to a point in your life where enough is enough, you have to, and by that point that will be the most spiritual moment in your life, because that will allow you room for new answers and new questions.
Absolutely. Yeah, you know, the when you look back at your life, all the periods of growth were often brought about by those times of conflict, or there's times where you struggled, or there was some sort of issue that you challenged that you had to face, right? So, and again, like that's another kind of stoic principle, like the obstacle is the way. Um, it's showing you there's also, you know, stories in spiritual teachings that allude to the same thing. A lot of the time the journey to enlightenment, or the journey on becoming that better version of yourself, whatever you want to call it, is paved with those experiences. It's like you gotta go to like the depths of hell, so to speak, to then rise from the ashes, or then have that story like a phoenix.
Mm-hmm.
uh, yeah. And you know, whatever you might say, that sounds kind of cheesy or whatever, but there's a lot of truth in some of those spiritual stories, whether they're from the Bible or some of these other teachings. um and I find when as you go throughout life and you come through experiences, you kind of find you begin to resonate with stories like that.
Yeah. Yeah, no, for sure. And that's like the thing. I think as human beings, to have an open mind to people, like everyone has nuggets of truth that can be presented through another person just to show you aspects of yourself perhaps that you can't see by yourself. I'm sure after this conversation, you're going to show me parts of myself that I couldn't see just being by myself, like not doing this podcast with you. And when we have that open mind to people, the people in our lives maybe that we don't even like, well, maybe that person's showing you, you know, through you not liking them, maybe an area of your life that you don't like about yourself, or other areas. You know, we all have like these little puzzle pieces that we get to offer another person to complete our very own puzzle.
Yeah, and that actually, you know, that is very true. That's like projection. That again in psychology is like when we have those big reactions to somebody else's behavior, somebody's doing something and it's like really pissing us off. A lot of the times there's an aspect of their behavior that is pointing out something about our own selves that we don't want to look at, like our own shadow. And
Mm-hmm.
that's why we're having that kind of disproportionate, kind of triggered reaction to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like the thing. I think, you know, to get a hold of your triggers, I think is something that should be practiced. It's not something that you should just fall victim to, is like a trigger. I
Yeah.
think it's something that needs to have some sort of reflection afterwards for you to fully be aware of where it's coming from, and why am I so easily persuaded by this heavy emotion. Well, it's
Hmm.
because it's something I'm used to. Maybe your triggers are very protection mechanisms your ego has put up for yourself to feel safe within the very aspects of yourself that you're ready to maybe evolve out of, being small, being weak, being, you know, the list could go on. And I think that's why for me in my life right now is I'm very aware of my triggers in my personal life. And
Yeah.
I'm aware of where they come from. And it doesn't necessarily take away the intensity when they come online, but it at least gives me a roadmap back into my empowerment by showing myself where I've been disempowered in the past, and maybe where I'm still perpetuating it in my current reality.
No, exactly. Because if you have that awareness that you developed, now you've kind of integrated the shadow a bit, and you've said,
Mhm.
"Hey, look, I still might get triggered by this.
Mhm.
Okay, I'm triggered right now, but I also have this awareness to say, hey, look, this is actually coming kind of from that pain body experience where it's not really all about what's right in front of me. Let's say my partner did something, or let's say something happened, or somebody, whatever. Well, yeah, I'm triggered right now by this thing, but really the depth of this emotional response, of this emotional expression, is actually stemming from this thing from the past. So it really puts things into perspective, and then it allows you to kind of see things for what they are, and really understand that, look, like, again, everything's shades of gray. Yeah, maybe my partner did something that wasn't the most ideal thing,
Mhm.
but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater and, put all of this onto them, right?
Yeah. Yeah, because we all have a key part also. Like when things like kind of go not the way necessarily we intended them to go, well, things always will show up in your life as intended. And maybe it's not consciously being intended by you. Maybe it's being intended by the very parts of yourself that need to be seen by you. And a great way to see yourself is through conflict and how you show up, because how you show up for conflict is the very things that are still inside of you. And if you still have buttons inside that are easily pressable, that has nothing to do with the other person being able to press your buttons. It's you still having a button that can be pressed.
Yeah, you're basically handing the entire world this remote control
Yeah.
and making it so easy for them to push all your buttons, when really, instead of handing people this remote where it's so easy to press all your buttons, you need to look at the manual, take a manual and say, hey, like, this is how I can respond. This is how, or offer people a manual to say, hey, look, this is, and in a calm way,
Mhm.
express, I don't really like this, makes me feel a little bit unappreciated, this, whatever. But yeah, again, it comes back to taking that distance and understanding, like you said, becoming self-aware to say, these are my triggers. And yeah, in the moment you might get triggered still, but
Yeah.
you'll still have that wherewithal to say, hey, look, this wasn't all about this. This is actually stemming from something in my childhood, something that happened in a past relationship, something that happened in my past. And I'm not going to take it all out on this person, And again, we're all human beings. Life is full of uncertainty, and navigating these situations with our partner rather than trying to find the answers in social media or with somebody else, or some of our one of our friends that doesn't really like. And also look at the quality of their relationships too. Like, do you want the people that you're taking advice from, do you want their, if
Exactly.
they're yeah, is that what you want? Most people have completely dysfunctional relationships, so that's important too. And it's all comes back to your own discernment of a situation, your own discernment of everything, and not following again on the bandwagon with all these different kind of lanes of thinking. There's a couple other quotes that you had in here that I wanted to, because you got some bangers. You got some
Oh, thank you.
you got some good quotes here. So it's like, we're led to believe that our emotions or thoughts are true. We already kind of talked about this, but you've adopted a lot of your thoughts just to fit in. But we shouldn't be fitting into today's society. We should stand out, speak truth, make an impact, and trigger people who care if it's coming from our true integrity of us knowing better.
Yeah.
And I couldn't agree more. And that's, again, we've touched on this, but that's like kind of what you're doing on your channel. You had another one that's, don't allow emotions to consume you. Like you've been taught, use them for a higher purpose. I like that one as well.
Oh, thank you. Those are great, and those are great reminders even just for me. But yeah, everything, I think, like, within this life, we all have something to offer. And especially when we can offer something like we all have a gift within, and it all has a right to be expressed. And I think for me, I had to get to a point in my life is I actually had to honor my integrity. I wasn't honoring my integrity by over sexualizing myself for validation. That wouldn't get me into an empowered state of being a woman or being able to show up in healthy ways for other people around me, like it's so easily shown in today's society. Like, this is one thing that I'm very, very passionate about, is the over sexualization of women in today's society. And I really want to touch on it because it's brought into, I think, just relationships, ourselves in general, being able to be so easily persuaded by our sexual energy is very dangerous, because it's a very powerful energy. And when we're using it to fuel like a validational like wound that we have within, it can cause a lot of destruction within women, within men. Like
Mm.
porn addiction is like higher than ever, and like outlets for it, and it's just, it causes so much disturbance. And this is really like another underlying message I have within my videos, is like, we need to stop over sexualizing ourselves for some sort of false validation.
Yeah, you had said I think you called it the infection of promiscuity.
Yeah.
And they said, how is this related to seeking validation? And like also I was curious how you think we can get past this.
Mm. I think it's more so like how I got past it in my own personal life, because I used to be like I said, I'm very open. I used to have an OnlyFans for like, I only had it honestly for a couple months, but I was used to over sexualizing myself since I was 16. And I would like post bikini photos on Instagram when I was 16 up to the point I was like 23. And in my life, what I got out of that wasn't me being like healed as a woman. It was just me kind of falling more and more in trap with needing another person's acceptance of me, not through my voice, but through my body, through my looks. Do I look good enough? Am I worthy enough for a like, a comment? And it kind of spikes my dopamine and all of this stuff, that the hormones, or like, you know, everything that kind of gets ignited through that. So for me, I had to be real with myself. Like, I don't think a lot of women are real with themselves in our society today. It's like, okay, well, yes, you're posting a video of maybe, or a picture of yourself half naked, but why are you doing that? If a woman got 0 likes for doing that, a woman would never do it again. She would be horrified by it, because she's not getting any validation from it. And it's a very vulnerable thing to do, is to show yourself in that way. But they only do it is because there's a perpetuation of validation that's occurring, that's band-aiding herself to be able to validate herself in just her
Yeah.
expression.
Yeah, it's a destructive cycle too, because then it puts your locus of control is completely outside of yourself. Like you said, you're
Mm-hmm.
not filling from your own cup, and every time you kind of do that, every time you kind of again, it's kind of giving all your power away again, because it's like you're caught in this cycle where you're seeking all this external validation, and because of that, you're not able to like internally have your own kind of fill your own cup, so to speak, or have that internal validation, or have those your own ideas. You're essentially just chasing on that hamster wheel of validation, it seems like.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it's not something that ultimately, like for me, it made me have a sense relief almost of like, um my unworthiness being like band-aided by another person viewing me as worthy enough to like me for a second on Instagram, and how like really pathetic that really is like me needing to showcase, and not even just me, a lot of other women needing to do this for
Mm-hmm.
an underlying, and also be aware for women, the way you present yourself online, it does matter. And a lot of women present themselves promiscuously online, but then expect a traditional man. And you can't have that. It doesn't work, you know? And that's why it was very important to me, because I'm also in that space of when I was over sexualizing myself, I was in a relationship. And how was that being, you know, I didn't take into account how my partner would feel about that. It was like, oh, I'm an empowered woman, I can do it because everyone else is, and you can't say anything about it. So I think that's like the thing. It can cause a lot of disturbances just through relationships as well, the more overly sexualized you are, and the types of relationships you attract through that.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, it's interesting because that it's kind of like feeding this kind of insecurity as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I noticed, it can be online, but women can also be promiscuous in their relationships as well. Like I've heard stories and had, various things where, women will be in a relationship with a man, but in the climate of our current day society, women are more often to go outside of the bounds of the relationship than the man is. And they can do this through, online, or they can just start flirting with guys or hooking up with guys on the side. And for some reason, women, I don't know why, but they seem to think that this is like okay, or they don't take accountability for it or whatever. And it's a like a weird double standard that they have, where it's like you'll have these women that will kind of justify that type of thing, especially around other single women, or women that kind of hold that kind of idea, and kind of blame it on the guy, even though they're the they're the ones that
Yeah.
are, yeah. So I don't I don't know.
I know it's honestly it's a deep conversation to be had within regards to that, because I think promiscuity is celebrated in so many ways within women, like through music. Even like a lot of women, they listen to all these music, like these artists that are promoting this lifestyle and how it's like empowering to basically like, you know be in control, like, have that sexual liberation that's happening. But being truly sexually liberated is honoring your sexuality. And by honoring your sexuality, it's honoring who gets to enter that space with you. And a lot of people are leaving the sacredness outside of what sex means, and even like using our sexual energy. And we can use our sexual energy for things of manifestation. It's very powerful energy. We can use it for that. We can also use it to, cause destruction in our relationships and in our personal relationships to ourselves. And that's why to get a hold of the sacredness that is behind our sexual energy is so powerful. Because when I was able to actually honor my sexuality, I was repulsed to even have the energy to post myself half naked for another person to see me in this light that I don't want to be seen in. I don't want to be seen in a like sexual light that's like also depleting our men in today's society. It didn't make me feel good.
Yeah. Yeah, it is there's a lot to that, and there's a lot to unpack with that. I think that ultimately, like what you're doing on the channel right now is a great way of channeling that energy, because
Mm-hmm.
you're doing something creative that's having an impact on people. And to me, that's what I like to do as well. I think that create the sexual energy that we have as human beings is also a creative energy. It's a creative force and power within us. And so I do think that a lot of the time that people that are more conscious of channeling the energy will engage in some sort of creative pursuit, or something where they're able to channel it in a productive manner, rather than just constantly seeking stimulation in that way, or yeah, in a way where you're looking outside of yourself all the time. And it goes for everything. It goes for like just us wanting dopamine through our cell phone constantly.
Yeah.
It goes, we get in these like ADHD, this kind of habit where we're constantly seeking that dopamine hit. And then it can manifest itself in literally, yeah, just, ruining your relationships, going outside the relationship because, oh, my vow, I'm not feeling enough attention in my relationship. So I'm going to go and do this, whether it's OnlyFans or whether it's, going and hooking up with somebody else or whatever it might be. I think getting in touch with that, and it kind of goes back to, I believe, like accepting the collaborative approach, and understanding that we're all connected, and we have this higher divine divinity within us, and this higher energy, and we want to use it in a way where, like, we're doing something good on the planet. Like you said, we're not, you don't want to contribute to this cycle. Like you said, it perpetuates. It's not good for men either. It's this lustful cycle that never, it's just like devolving ourselves. And so I think one thing that's kind of, I know that nowadays, right, religion's not as popular as it used to be. And it's not to say that we need to full on embrace religion, but I think without a shared moral value system, it's very hard for us to be united, and we won't be able to like understand each other.
And that's why I think it's a very crucial part of being able to understand yourself is being able to understand why you do the things you do. And that's truly the roadmap back inside of like your who you are as a person and who you're expressing as and through, and what area of your personal identity are you being is being channeled through you. We channel different areas of our own like psyche in different ways. just for us to actually see like what's working in our life, what's not working. For me, I'm so grateful that now I'm 24 and I understand this so early on in my life. I'm very grateful for it, and I'm also grateful for me going through what I had to go through within like Instagram, kind of being a part of that kind of modern day woman type of thing. That's kind of like uh, being tossed around, that word, the modern day woman, who's usually in that kind of area of like, either being overly masculine in some way, not making space for a man, being over sexual. And all of this stuff is not recipes for a woman to even embrace femininity and be able to respect herself. And when I was able to actually respect myself, there was no possible way I would do the things I used to do, because I was showing myself where I did not respect myself. And yeah, I think the true way for women to understand why they do the things they do will perhaps break them free from a lot of these things that are keeping them entrapped in this way of living that isn't providing them with any true substance to
Yeah.
life.
And or fulfillment.
Yes.
We got to realize at a certain point, like, there's more women are depressed now than ever before. More men are depressed and on both on psychiatric medication more than ever in the history of the world. And we're less happy. There's studies on happiness show that happiness has just been declining, especially in the US, ever
Mm-hmm.
since 1990. So whatever we're doing, whatever we think we know better or we're doing, it's clearly not working. Like, if we just look in the mirror, we can see that our levels of fulfillment, levels of happiness are going downhill. So it's time to kind of embrace a different approach. And yeah, like, having channels like yours is really awesome so that people are able to see and invite a different perspective of looking at things. Because yeah, it's like the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? If it's not working, then we have to
Mm-hmm.
adjust the approach. We're hitting like over the hour mark here, so we'll wrap up here in a bit. But I just wanted to like basically, there's a couple more notes that I had taken here, and I think that these are kind of interesting ways that we can kind of like segue off to wrap up this conversation. So we talked about the shared the shared value system, and the note that I took, and again, it's from this psychologist who I think has some like very good insights on this. He said if people just game the system on a micro level in their relationships and on the macro level in our society, we're going to have fragmentation, and then it's like all hell breaks loose. It's back to conflict, division, attacking from one group to another, and it basically creates a hell on earth. And I think that that's kind of like the direction that we're going in our current day. He says we can strive for changes, but without giving into the extreme emotional experience and totally vilifying the other. Maintain empathy for one another. Once there's total vilification, the dialogue breaks down, and we must educate on psychological truths. Good is not perfect. Good is accepting everything within yourself, not saying you're pure and everything is wrong with the other. We are shades of gray. And he says if people were more educated on human psychology and the way it takes form in political institutions and in group behavior, then people would be more alert to the danger signals when division and polarization takes place. And I really agree with that, because you see that if you look at history, history tends to repeat itself. And you can see this happening on a macro level with wars and different things we've learned about in our history books, but it's also going on a person to person level. And so he says to reflect what's going on in your mind, what's going on between you and another person, instead of reacting at the gut level. See if you're engaging in something that's taking you away from the complexity of the situation, that leaves you in a simplistic and polarized position, which is only going to lead to further conflict. Responding to strong feelings, and feelings insist on lashing out, yelling, or doing something worse. Having a step back before acting is important, and instead of acting on impulse with no thought, reflect, maybe turn it into a statement instead of a behavior, and getting to a resolution-oriented approach instead of attacking and blaming. So,
Powerful, very powerful.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, I think that kind of like summarizes also some of the points that we've made as we've been speaking today. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that in terms of going forward with it, it's just having more of these healthy conversations, embracing that idea that everything is shades of gray, and being more self-aware and checking ourselves when we're not. Just kind of like you talked about before. So,
Yeah,
um,
I think that's so beautiful, and I think it's conversations like these that allow other people also to be open to a new maybe way of thinking and a new way to perceive life and themselves, and to know that on this earth right now, we can all relate to the uncomfortability that comes with being a human being, and I think it's ignorant to think anything other than that. Like, being a human being, it comes with the ups, it comes with the downs. It's like you said, it's like it's not a black and white way of living. It really isn't, and to find beauty within your pain as well, and having outlets for your pain also was a huge thing that helped me get back inside of my own sacredness and how sacred our emotions truly are. And that can be maybe making music, making a YouTube channel. For me, it was like, I remember when I was going through a lot of pain, it was like doing poetry and making like art out of my pain and make my pain have purpose, and that can help other people. And through your pain is also your ability to know how to show up for yourself, so you can show up for other people in the ways that maybe you so wished another person could for you. And just know that when you look at life as a way to take out of, like, if the saying that I like to do is like, how can this serve me right now in my life? How can anything that comes your way, how can it serve you? And when you have that in mind, the universe, etc., your outside reality will show you the very ways it will serve you by your also participation within it, and not kind of identifying just to the victim, but knowing that you're that's not all of you, and not to get stuck in that, and that every single person has a gift to share. I don't care what it is. For me, I never thought in a million years that my purpose would be to like assist men in the way I do and talk about semen retention. Now, you could not tell me that like last year that I would be doing this now and coaching men in that area, but I
mm,
am. And why is because I had an open mind. I followed my excitement and I stayed true to my integrity. And now I'm living a life I'm proud of. By, like, last year when I was doing OnlyFans, I wasn't proud of that. I wouldn't tell that to people. It was something that it was like, I don't want to. But now it's like, yeah, this is what I do and I'm so proud of it. And to speak life into to people is truly what's needed, and is not to like put them down in any way.
yeah, yeah, that's beautiful. And again, that goes into challenging, not challenging, channeling. We
Yeah.
talked earlier about the sexual energy, but also the pain, right? You're able to channel that pain into something that's productive, that's positive. How can this serve me? How can this serve others? And how can I do something with this? And it's a great example, like what you're doing, for example, because you're able to take this and you can tell, watching, for anybody that's watching this, if you go to Maya's channel and watch her videos, you can just feel the authenticity that she's speaking from. And to anybody that is going through whatever challenges, uncertainty in their life, and you have that kind of external locus of control, you're constantly seeking validation and stuff, realize that that's kind of just it's kind of a losing game. And when you shift back, put your focus on yourself, how can you do something to create instead of constantly chase for something that's really just an illusion? I think that that'll be really, really fulfilling for everybody long term. And like I said, you're having an amazing impact on people. You see the comments people leaving on your channel, and it kind of speaks for itself. So much, yeah. It's dope. It's really dope seeing your channel and seeing you grow. And I'm glad
Thank
that
you so
yeah,
much. This has been
yeah,
such a wonderful conversation, and I'm truly grateful for you opening the space for us to communicate and allowing other people into this conversation as well. I definitely got a lot out of it, and I'm just so grateful that we as creators can kind of create out of the space that we're creating out of, is like using our very things that maybe made us less than in the past, or coming out of it from like passions, etc., whatever it is, like, just tune into what makes you passionate, what makes you excited, and then act through that. Like, I was excited to do this, like, and it made me excited, and it made me in my purpose and in my passion, and probably vice versa. So there's
Mhm.
outlets that people can do to feel this way, and like to embrace your unique gifts and you being a unique individual. So yeah, I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah, thank you so much for taking the time. It's been awesome talking to you. For everybody that's watching, I'm going to drop like Maya's links down below in the description. Drop this video a like. Drop us a comment down below and let us know what your thoughts are on this. We would love to hear what you guys have to say and hear your thoughts. Hit me with a subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video.